Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. In a time when democracy itself seems to hang in the balance, when the struggle between progressive values and autocracy defines our political landscape, the question arises, how do we turn conviction into victory? My guest today argues that the answer lies not just in strength of our beliefs, our enthusiasm, or our determination, but in the nuts and bolts of political organizing and campaign execution. Robert Kramer is a veteran political strategist with 5 decades of progressive activism, and he has distilled his wealth of experience into a new book, Nuts and Bolts: The Formula for Progressive Electoral Success. From his early days working with Saul Alinsky to his role in helping pass the Affordable Care Act and defeating attempts to privatize Social Security, Kramer has been at the forefront of numerous progressive battles. His blueprint for victory is all about execution, the often less glamorous blocking and tackling of politics. In an era where undecided voters can't be found with even the most powerful political microscope, when both sides are conducting a base election, turning out the voters becomes paramount. In a political climate where passion alone is not enough, Kramer offers a pragmatic handbook for organizers, communicators, and campaigners. Robert Kramer is a Duke University graduate. He developed his organizing skills in the crucible of the 1960s civil rights and anti-Vietnam War movement, and he's been a force behind major progressive victories. As a founder of Illinois' largest progressive coalition and the co-founder of Democracy Partners, he has orchestrated hundreds of campaigns at every level of American politics. It is my pleasure to welcome Robert Kramer here to the program to talk about Nuts and Bolts, the formula for progressive electoral success. Robert Kramer, thanks so much for joining us.
Jeff, it's so great to be your guest. Good to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you here. You've been doing this for a long time. Have the nuts and bolts of politics, the organizing, the fundamental work of getting people to vote, has that changed in the 30, 40 years you've been doing this?
And it's been closer to 50, 55 years. But the answer is fundamentally no. The mechanisms have changed. That is to say, the vehicles, the media through which we can communicate. And the world has definitely changed because of the internet in a fundamental way. But basically, politics is about communicating with people whose behavior we're trying to change one way or the other. And it's about addressing their self-interests in a very fundamental way, understanding where they're coming from, and then moving them into action. And those are the things that have been the case forever, as far as, at least from our point of view, forever.
Has the moving to action part of that, has that become more difficult because of generational factors, because it is harder to motivate young people than it is boomers like us to grew up with different expectations in terms of voting?
Well, I got to say, I think there are a lot of young people in motion now. And if it is harder, it's because we aren't doing the job. I say we. I don't mean the older generation. I mean people who are engaged in political work are not doing the job as well as they should. Saul Alinsky used to say, there's no such thing as apathy, only bad organizers. I mean, it's our responsibility to convince people, to motivate people, that because we understand their interests and then place them into motion. Which, by the way, is the best way to convince people of anything. Put them in motion. Let them go cheer for somebody to rally. Let them go put a yard sign up in the yard. I mean, first steps are the way we move things along. And by the way, I'm one of the partners in our firm is a young man who's heads Voters of Tomorrow, another that heads an outfit called Blue Future. These guys are working with young people and being remarkably successful at motivating them.
How has all the noise that's in the system today impacted all of this?
Well, there's always a lot of noise in communication. Our job is to figure out how to break through. And breaking through, and really the principal lesson I'd like people to draw from this book, if there's just one lesson, is best expressed by Maya Angelou, the poet, who said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. Great political communication and motivation is about how you feel about yourself. And that's true of persuasion as well. When we're trying to persuade somebody of something, or of a candidate in particular, it's more like a love affair than it is some kind of, present a rational case with points or whatever. You want them to feel good in the presence of this candidate. I mean, they need to make you feel good about yourself. And one of the tricks that Trump has done is taken the alienation of a bunch of people who think that the country has passed them by and that they're being disrespected, and attempted to become their champion. And that makes people feel empowered. We need to take seriously some of those people that he's addressed, because a lot of those people have in fact been passed by, although the policies that Trump articulates will make them even worse. I mean, he's basically the billionaire class candidate, but he's been good at trying to convince people that he's with them by making them feel good about themselves.
Given that there seems to be less persuadable voters out there, the organizing, getting people out to vote seems to be even more fundamental today. Talk about that.
Absolutely. I think this is a turnout election more than anything else. There is a small group of persuadables, and there are a lot of messages that work for persuadables, but the two that I want to mention are convincing people that the candidate's on their side and inspiring them. Inspiration has two parts to it. Feeling on the one hand that you're part of something bigger than yourself, and on the other hand, that you yourself can make a significant contribution to the broader goal. That makes people feel empowered. And when it comes to mobilizable voters, people who would vote for our candidates if we just get them to vote, but we can't get them to vote without mobilizing. The messages, I think, they're about a number that work there too, but the two most important are inspiration, once again, and I won't get off your porch until you vote, which we can have a lot to say about.
Talk about the inspiration part, because there is always this debate that takes place, particularly with respect to candidates, whether or not we need charismatic leadership in order to get people inspired. And on the other side, the argument that it's really just about grassroots organizing. And unfortunately, it often becomes an either-or conversation when you're talking about this with people.
And it's not. You're absolutely right. I mean, candidates themselves can be inspirational leaders. But being part of an organization that can make something spectacular or important happen can be equally inspirational to you. And I hope in this campaign, both of those two things are being addressed. On the one hand, there is no doubt this is an election, as you pointed out at the top of the show here, we're on a knife's edge. We could either veer toward authoritarianism, or if we won the House, the Senate, and the presidency again, we could have the most progressive period in modern American history next year, and do a huge number of things that people support. I mean, that massive numbers of Americans support. Most Americans support progressive values. We just get them out to vote. But and we got to convince people that they hope. You can't get them to hope. You can't get them to vote. We got to present both sides of that, and that's very important. On the other hand, candidates themselves can have an inspirational role. I remember when Barack Obama was running the first race, I was consultant to both his campaigns. A lot of African Americans took the pictures of their slave grandparents to the polls with them because they were so moved at voting for the first Black president of the United States. And that was in itself an inspiration. And of course, Barack was an extraordinary speaker who can inspire people.
Why has it been so difficult, in your view, for progressives to be more successful? As you pointed out a moment ago, so many of the arguments, so many of the causes that Democrats or progressives put forth are very popular among voters, but it has been difficult to translate that into electoral success.
Well, one thing I would just point out, the first 2 years of the Biden presidency have been extraordinarily successful at passing progressive legislation with very small margins in the House, and we just need to remember that. I mean, there have been lots of successes, but you're absolutely right that one would expect, given the popularity of our positions, that we would be in a position to have more success. And there are a couple of good reasons why not, and why that we have obstacles to overcome. One is there are a number of undemocratic structures in American society. The electoral college is one of them. I mean, it's absolutely undemocratic that every vote doesn't count the same in America, and that Democrats have won 8 of the last 10 presidential elections in the national vote, but a number of these cases Republicans won because of the electoral college, and we got to change that, in my view. The other is that the United States Senate is a very undemocratic institution. It's the most undemocratic parliamentary body in the Western world to start with, by design. I mean, people in Wyoming have 38 times more power per person in the Senate than people in California. But quite apart from that, the filibuster basically takes people who represent 20% of the population and gives them veto power over the policies we pass. That's got to change. There are a lot of people with huge sums of money in America who have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. And we got to forcefully take those people on. Luckily, there are not many of them, but they're very powerful. And organize the mass of our neighbors. And the mass of our neighbors are responsive to that. Even people in kind of Trump land, if you ask them if they don't want billionaires to pay their fair share in taxes, they say yes. I mean, we got to be talking about that, have a populist appeal, particularly in these factory towns around the United States that Trump has been so successful at addressing.
Talk a little bit about the technology of organizing today, going door to door, the basic, blocking and tackling of political organizing, calling people, getting. The technology has made this a lot easier, a lot more complicated in some ways, but easier to do.
Well, on the one hand, technology has been a phantom substitute. I mean, if you go into a room with people who say they're organizers and you hear nothing but tapping on the computer, they're not really organizing. They're not building relationships. They need to be on the phone. They need to be out in the people's living rooms, building relationships, building organizations of real people. And that's partially because 80% of communication is nonverbal. I mean, it's your posture, it's your tone of voice, it's all this stuff that is about more than the words that are printed. But on the other hand, technology has really improved the ability we have to do things. For instance, our ability to target persuadable and mobilizable voters has massively improved because we have databases that code people's likelihood to be a Democrat and likelihood to vote based on past voter history. We know who we can go to who are in one of those two categories, persuadable or mobilizable, so we can target our resources. We have phone platforms like our firm has a platform called Call Hub that allows you to make calls from your house as part of a big phone bank and gives you only people who are living, breathing people who are on the phone. And so you don't waste your time. It makes life a lot easier. And then, of course, texting is a wonderful means of mobilization as well that needs to be widely used. But that doesn't undercut the efficacy and importance of personal door talking to people at the door. That's the one that really increases voter turnout likelihood. Empirically, we've done studies on that. It really does. And you can, I'll give you an example. In the George Santos race, the race to replace George Santos, remember right. George, in New York last spring, the New York Times Siena poll had it even up before the election because they thought 50% of the voters would be Republican registrants and 50% Democrats. That ignored the fact that Democrats had made 300,000 phone calls and 150,000 door knocks. And it turns out there was an 8% advantage of Democrats voting, and we won by 8 points. What a surprise. A lot of these pollsters underestimate that all the time, that these polls are not just about the margin of error, they're about the margin of effort. And we know that voter contact really does improve voter turnout. And building armies of volunteers does too, because then you talk to your neighbors and your friends, and there's enthusiasm and excitement builds because you're involved in an organization with other people.
How much more difficult is it to make those phone calls today when landlines basically don't exist anymore? It's harder to get people to answer their cell phone, et cetera.
Well, that's true. It's a problem. And puts a premium on door-to-door once again. And of course, people aren't home either. I mean, it means you've got to make multiple tries. You've got to keep at it. You've got to address people at multiple levels using the various media that they utilize. I mean, phones is one thing, uh, text is another, door to door is another, mail is another, and postcards. People signing individually signed postcards that can have an impact. I mean, I'm not a guy who says, "Oh, don't do television." Of course, do television, but I'm not a guy who believes that television is a replacement. There's the new precinct captain, not at all. The new precinct captain is the person who knocks on your door and talks to you, the same one that used to be. And we that's the real blocking and tackling, building organization, and then communicating through every media we can. I'm a big fan of signs. Uh, as much as anything, they're very effective at communicating, breaking through, getting name recognition, and so on. But beyond that, yard signs in particular are have another message, and that is that, oh, my neighbors are supporting this guy. And bandwagon is a huge factor in personal decision making. Social proof matters a lot. If you've got a bunch of folks who are running for office, I mean, who are supporting somebody, well, maybe he's pretty good. So that kind of visibility is very helpful.
To what extent is money important in this kind of work?
Huge, uh, hugely important. And the fact that our campaign finance system puts a premium on getting it from rich people is a huge problem. Hopefully, one that we can change early next year if we take control of the House, Senate, and the presidency. But money is needed to communicate message, whether it's by TV, whether it's by paying for the offices that and the staff that organize people. One of the things that Kamala Harris had as a huge advantage when she became the candidate is that she inherited the Biden field operation that they'd created over months. There were 1,200 organizers and 270 offices in 7 states already when she took over, and then they unleashed this huge volume of new volunteers based on the enthusiasm, and those organizers were able to put them to work in a systematic way. And in general, by the way, I periodically run into candidates who say, how's your field operation? They say, well, it's okay. We have 3 organizers in a congressional race, and there's not a lot of volunteers. And I inevitably say, hey, well, it's not enough organizers. You know why? Fish don't jump into the boat. You got to have fishermen to get volunteers. Got to get people talking to people and asking them. And so there's money involved in providing the infrastructure to build volunteer-based apparatus.
Do you find that people are still willing to talk when people knock on doors, even when candidates come to doors? It seems there's more resistance than there used to be.
No, I think I don't think so. I think there's people are absolutely willing to talk to people about politics, particularly if those people start off by asking them questions. Great political communication is about listening and asking as much as it is stating a position, because we need to be resonant with the self-interest of the people we're talking to. And it's also true that people think you're awful smart if you ask about them. I once had a girlfriend who didn't like me very much when I was in high school. Doesn't like me. His father didn't like me. She liked me, I think. But the girlfriend's father didn't. So we went water skiing with her father one day, and he was in the insurance business. I decided I was going to try and make this guy like me by asking him all about the insurance business for the whole afternoon. And we got home, and the girlfriend called me and said, Daddy loves you. He thinks you're so smart. Now, I didn't say anything. I just asked him about himself. And that taught me a lesson. It's very important.
Is there a difference that we're seeing between national elections now and local elections? It used to be that local elections focused to a large measure on local issues. Even congressional elections had a certain local patina about them. Now it seems that the polarization that we see in the country has filtered down even to city council and school board races. How has that impacted all of this?
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, a lot of these races have been nationalized, and in some ways should be. That is to say, on the congressional level, control of Congress really does have a lot to do about the direction of the country, and a few seats can really make a difference. But I still find, Jeff, that there's a a lot in these congressional races of local, of discussion of local impacts of what's going on nationally, and in local races, real local races. Local issues are pretty salient when you're talking about whether somebody builds a stadium in your backyard, or whether somebody's trying to take books off your library shelf. Those are important issues to a lot of voters. So I would recommend continuing to talk about those and communicate with them. The best way, of course, to do political communication is by communicating through symbols. And the best symbols are stories. Telling stories is the best way to frame a political narrative. Because a political narrative in itself is a story. It has a protagonist and an antagonist that you have to define in the context of the campaign. And you also have to name the protagonist and antagonist and frame the issue you're talking about with a name that is value laden and addresses the values of people we're talking to. I'll give you an example. I was involved in stopping the privatization of Social Security. And the Bush administration, when it was pushing this project, which was aimed at really getting Wall Street's hands on the Social Security Trust Fund, wanted to push what they call personal accounts. And that sounded fairly innocuous to a lot of people. We wanted it to be about privatization of Social Security. We won that naming battle, and we won the battle as large measure because we won the naming battle, because nobody wanted their Social Security privatized and taken over by a bunch of Wall Street barons. Thank you very much. And naming is very important in these matters.
One of the other things about politics is that for a long time, working on campaigns, local politics, even broader than that, had a certain fun factor, particularly for young people that would get involved as volunteers and as important aspects of a campaign. Is that fun still around? It seems to be gone.
Great campaigns are fun. I mean, if you're organizing a great campaign, it's got to be a fun campaign. You're absolutely correct, and you got to build that in. A lot of that is through assuring that you're actually building organizations of people who have relationships, because that's part of the fun part. I will say, though, that when we have organizers on election campaigns, very often a week or so before the election, they're coming to you and saying, this is so hard, man. I'm never going to do this again. And election night, they come to you and says, where do I sign up to do another one? This is so exciting, because it all comes together and it's kind of a epiphany moment. But yeah, elections need to be fun for the people who participate in them, and also joyful. Kamala has done a great job at talking about a joyful culture, and because people like joy a lot better than despair.
Robert Kramer, his book is Nuts and Bolts, The Formula for Progressive Electoral Success. Robert, I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Really glad to be with you, Jeff, anytime. And thank you so much for what you're doing there.
Thank you.